Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, which is called Getting It Right, Safety Culture, Health and Safety Priorities and Training Provision, which is sponsored and in association with Make UK. This session is broadcast by SHP and we are part of Informa Markets. So my name is Mark Glover. I'm the editor here at SHP. I'll shortly be handing you over to Chris Newson and Dan Shipway, both at Make UK. Chris is the Health, Safety and Sustainability Director, and Dan is the Head of Sales at Make UK. But before we kick off, as ever, I just have a couple of housekeeping points to go through before we start. So the webinar, ultimately, we want to be interactive to engage with you. So if you haven't done it before, there's a suite of widgets at the bottom of the screen which will allow you to learn a bit more about today's speakers, about Dan and Chris. You'll also be able to download some resources related to the webinar, which I'll touch on in a bit. And if you wish, share the webinar on your social media. So one of the important widgets is the Q&A one, and this will allow you to participate with us by submitting questions that you have for our speakers as we go along. Do pop these questions into that Q&A box. We'll filter them through and I will get them to the speakers at the end of the presentation, where we've carved out about 10-15 minutes or so to put questions to Chris and Dan. Offline, going ahead, there will be a full recording of today's webinar, which will be available for you to listen back to on demand. Over the next couple of days, it will be emailed out to you. You can also download your CPD certificate for your attendance. Again, that'll be in one of the widget buttons at the bottom of the screen. So if you want to, make sure you download that before you log off today. Finally, from our point of view, if you do, you'll be prompted to complete a very, very quick survey on how today's gone. If you can take a minute or two just to do this as your feedback, just gives us really good information how we can improve future events. Lastly, on the housekeeping side, if you're having any technical issues, there's a help widget at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, or just put your issue into that Q&A area, we've got some people behind the scenes who will be able to offer you one-on-one assistance if you're having a few technical issues there. So great, that's the housekeeping out of the way, and just now we can move on to the main event, to this webinar, which I think is going to be a really interesting one. It's around safety culture. We talk a lot about safety culture on the website, writing about it, speaking to people about it. It's a really important thing, obviously. We talk about what it is, what it isn't, but sometimes I guess perhaps the best way of gauging a safety culture is actually going to the front line, speaking to people who are trying to implement that culture in a workforce. So SHP, a couple of months ago, we worked with Make UK with this goal of trying to gauge people's attitudes around this. So what we did, we put together a survey, and we went out to a range of health and safety professionals, asking them some sort of pretty candid questions actually about their culture. Results came back, and you might have seen we put these results into a really nice white paper, which was published a few weeks back, I think. Speaking about those resources, I think you can download it here in the widget box, or you can go back to on SHP and you'll find it. It's free to download. And what we're going to do today with Chris and Dan is go into that white paper, get a bit more insight into what we found, really dig deep into some of the stuff that came out from it. Just before I hand over to Chris, though, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the sample. It's always important to give a sample and how we got the results. So we had just over 200 responses, and the vertical straddled manufacturing, construction, engineering. In terms of job titles, we were working with health and safety advisors, heads of health and safety managers. Also 11% of respondents were at director level, which was good. And the whole sample, nearly the whole sample, 93% were members of a professional body, so either IOSH or BOHS, the British Occupational Hygiene Society. So I just wanted to add that foundation before we go on. So that's me. Now I'm going to hand over to Chris Newson at Make UK. Chris, good morning, and over to you.
Morning, Mark. Thank you very much. So, yeah, as Mark explained, we've carried out this survey or SHP have carried out this survey with us, and this is really just commenting on some of the main themes that are there. So one of the main things that came out was that companies think, across all the different levels that Mark's talked about, that changing culture or having a positive safety culture was quite important. And I'm sure that won't be a surprise to anyone on the event today. But I'm going to talk more about that and how we practically might make improvements in that area. First of all, the first point I wanted to touch on is a rather, I guess, straightforward fact that we don't all see the same thing. You know, we all have our own perceptions, and they're all guided by, different things that happen. So when we think about safety culture, which I'll explain a bit more about in a second, you know, we might all work for the same company, but we've got a wildly different view of what the safety culture is. So in terms of just a quick, I guess, reminder of safety culture, I'm sure most people are aware of the concept. There are many different models that you can look at. This is one of the oldest models that exist, and it splits the safety culture into 4 areas. Before I just explain those areas or go over the key points, I wanted to just point out, you know, to me personally, and to Make UK, I guess, what safety culture is all about. Safety culture is, a good safety culture is having an organisation where everyone genuinely wants to look after themselves and other people, both of those things. When you've got a good safety culture, that is the case. You know, everyone wants to look after themselves and everyone else all of the time. That is a good safety culture. Safety culture is not a box to be ticked. Yes, you can be audited against it. It's not about that for me. It's not about ticking a box. Safety culture is a way to get to the end, which is to keep everyone safe and healthy. I'm fully aware that it is part of ISO 45001, and in fact, Make UK campaigned for safety culture to be included in the international standard when we were involved in writing it years ago. Safety culture didn't appear at all, and now it's a huge part. You'll find it in clause 5 of 45001. So it's really important, but the problem with it being in an ISO standard is people may see it as a box to be ticked, and it isn't. And if you think it is, then hopefully, you know, I'm sure you don't, but hopefully talking through it today will show you that that's not the case. So just a quick sort of some basics here. So we've got 4 areas or 4 stages of this culture model, and I'm just going to really touch on the key points. You can see some of the examples on the screen there. Reactive is where it is, as the title suggests, an accident happens and then someone does something about it. And to me, talking to many member companies, the something about it is often questions like, you know, whose fault was it? Who's to blame? Do we have to report it to the HSE? It's completely reactive. So that is the sort of the lower end of the spectrum in terms of safety culture. Dependent, to me, is where you have a safety manager driving things. So, for example, the safety manager will be the one out there doing the audits. So they're doing it, they have responsibility, and they're doing things like audits to check that everyone is doing what they should do. So nothing wrong with that. That's a way that we're progressing to where we want to be, but it doesn't ensure that everyone's looking after each other. It's dependent on the safety manager doing something. The next one along, independent, is a bit more proactive. Years ago we would have just called it proactive. In other words, we're doing things before accidents happen. We've got indicators like near misses and where is our safety culture, rather than just counting the number of accidents. The interdependent element is where genuinely everyone looks after each other. You know, you go to work, you see it as a key responsibility of yours to look after yourself and all your colleagues. It doesn't matter whether you're a director or a trackside worker or anyone else. You see it as your job to keep yourself safe and everyone else. So to me, that's what interdependent means. Now, one of the interesting things here is that it takes companies a long time to get to where they want to be. I'll talk through an example later on, but companies might think, yes, I'll have a 3-year plan and I'm going to get to interdependent by the end of it. That's, depending where you are now, that's extremely unlikely. It's a long journey, but it's worth doing because, as I've already said, it delivers those benefits of keeping everyone safe and healthy. So very quickly, that's what a culture model looks like. So what we're going to do now is just ask you, with those simple definitions, and I'm sure you've seen it before, where you think you are. So you can see a poll that's come up on the screen. If you could tick one of the boxes, or one of the circles rather, you've got about 30 seconds to answer it, and then we'll comment on some of the answers. Okay, are we starting to see some of the answers coming through now?
I think if you click through, Chris. And then,
okay.
Just wait.
There we go.
There we go.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so it's interesting. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, this is, to me, this shows that companies and the people, certainly the people on the event today, are being very honest, and I'll talk about how that doesn't always happen in a second. But that is exactly the sort of spread that we'd imagine that we would see. Not many companies actually in that interdependent area that I spoke about, where everyone just does health and safety because it's the right thing to do. I think that is, realistic. And some companies have been very honest in saying they're in that reactive stage. So, yeah, and that's the first step, sort of admitting, if you like, where you are. So thank you for taking part in that. Let's look into a bit why we don't always get those honest answers. And to me, it's about perception and those drivers that are around. And if you've read the white paper, we've talked more about why people have this perception. And I'll just use a couple of examples here. So if we think about a worker, so it might be a construction worker, it might be a trackside worker in a manufacturing company. It's someone that's doing the job, if you like, that's at the higher end of risk. If you ask them, and we do this through training courses that we deliver, a lot of the times they see the worst in the company. Not that they've got a bad attitude or anything, but they have an opportunity to see the worst. So they often say that companies are in that embryonic stage, or that first stage that's there. Lots of reasons for that. As I say, they have an opportunity to see the worst. They may also have an axe to grind for other reasons. On the other end of the spectrum, and you might be able to relate to this, you ask a director where they think they are in terms of health and safety, and they'll say, yeah, we're brilliant, we're fantastic, we're fully integrated or interdependent, using the model that we looked at before. The reason for that is it's sort of an insult, really, if they say anything else, because it's their company. So that is a risk that's there. And then finally, if you ask the safety practitioner, they're in the middle because they want to represent the reality and the worker, but they also, it's a matter of professional pride that they're not quite where they want to be, perhaps. So you get all sorts of different views for reasons, really to do with perception and the drivers that are there. The real answer, probably, if you looked at Make UK, for example, we're probably somewhere in the middle. This is just an example, of course. So we need to take a balanced view of all those different models, so all those different answers. So we'll talk about that as we go on and we get into a bit of a process of how we do this. But perception and agreeing that people have different perceptions is really important. As 3 different groups of people, you'll get 3 different answers within one company. So if we then look at, what do we do with that information, if you like? So we look at applying the safety culture model. What will happen is, people will say, and we get this all the time, okay, I want to go from reactive to interdependent, and I've got 3 years in my budget, that's where I want to be, that's the idea. and see it as a sort of a gap analysis. We've got some gaps and we're going to fill them. So we're going to look at the first one, understanding the risk. We're here at the moment. I want to get to there, let's say this first year here, and I want to get to there, and so on. And you can see I want to make those massive improvements, which will overall give me a move from reactive to interdependent. And I'm sorry to tell you this, I think you know this already, but that is not reality. You can't make changes like that. At Make UK, we talk to lots of different size companies, from very, very small, SMEs and below, to big global organisations. I remember talking to one of those global organisations years ago, and them, over 10 years ago, and them saying, yeah, we're looking at this model of safety culture, and our plan is to get to the end here within 5 years. So they audited it every year. After the first year, they'd actually gone backwards. So they put themselves at dependent, first of all. After that first year's audit, they were honest and they realised that actually they'd gone back to reactive. They hadn't moved really, but the way they were assessing it had got more sophisticated. So I think a couple of things. You need to be really honest about where you are today, and really strategic about which bits you're going to attack, how much resource you have, and how you're going to do it. And a more realistic picture perhaps might be in year one of a 3 to 5 year programme, depending on the size of your company. You might say, well, understanding the OSH risk, we're going to go from this bit reactive to here. So we're going to do some things about risk analysis, risk assessment. Workplace culture, that's a bit harder, so we're only going to move one step up, and without going through every line, you can see here. Now, this won't be the same for every company because you're at a different place, you've got different resources, and inevitably, as you make improvements, you discover more problems, actually, and you have to solve those. But the reality is that in year one, you might go from reactive to independent. But it's about your company, your organisation, the resources that you have. As long as you're moving in the right direction and you have a goal to get to interdependent by the end, that's the right trajectory to be on. So it's about being realistic, because, look, if you use this model and everyone expects everything to be right after the first year, this model here, that's just not going to happen. That's not reality. So you're just going to end up everyone being a bit, disenfranchised with the idea. So be realistic, have a plan like this, and there we go. So what's important when you're making these changes is to really embed the safety culture. It is not ticking a box. You'll probably hear me say that a number of times today. If we're doing that, it's not going to work. We really need to make behavioural change. We need to get people to look after each other. And in the white paper, we go into much more detail about this model that talks about the 3 aspects of safety culture. So situational, psychological, and behavioural. And situational, if I start with that one, it's the biggest one because it's the most important. If you've ever come across Maslow's hierarchy of needs before, you'll know that things like the basic needs, as he referred to them, heat, warmth, lighting, refreshments, water, etc. If we don't have them, we can't make any of these other advancements. So this is about the physical atmosphere, the physical environment that you're in, and making that the right sort of environment for your people. So you've got to get that bit right first. That is about investment, and a lot of the times, actually, it's about complying with the law. So if you're not at that stage, it's very difficult to make improvements. So that's the situational part. Psychological is the next bit, and we know what that word means, but in terms of a safety culture, it's about understanding the feelings of people and getting into how can we actually look at how people feel. And as soon as we say that, especially in the UK, it becomes, a little bit, we don't really want to ask that question. We have to ask that question if we want to improve the safety culture. So we have to understand how people feel about safety. Do they genuinely believe we'll get to this end goal of being interdependent? Or really, have they seen it before and they think something else? So that's what we need to look at. Once we've established that, the next cog in the machine, if you like, is the behavioural side. For me, this is about giving people the skills to influence people. So we know how people feel. We've met these basic needs. But we've got to have managers, supervisors, directors, and actually any other worker that has the skills to influence colleagues and people around them, because that's what this is about. You will inevitably have some people that feel very strongly about health and safety and some people that don't. Well, we need the influencing skills in order to do that. So those are the three aspects in terms of embedding this cultural change. And then finally, in this first section, I've outlined a bit of a process here. This is a process that we undertake with organisations when we're working with them on their safety culture. And I'll just sort of hit on the 4 key points here. Gaining top-level commitment. Okay, if you are going to start anywhere else other than the very top of your organisation, you will fail. That's a very direct thing to say, but it is true. There is an amount of top-down, bottom-up and meet in the middle. But look, if you haven't got top-level commitment to making a cultural change, it will not happen. So you've got to get that. You get that by influencing top-level management and explaining, all the reasons why health and safety is the right thing to do. And yes, we can talk about the law and you might get prosecuted. We can talk about money and it costs a lot of money to have accidents. But I really do think that moral is the top thing. If you have an accident and you're a senior director, yes, it costs you money and yes, you might go to prison, and I'm not being flippant there, but actually it's the moral side. It's the knowledge that you could have prevented someone getting hurt that stays with you. I think I've never been in that position, but I know many people that have, and that seems to be the case. So you've got to gain top-level commitment through those quite hard-hitting messages. Establish the position, agree goals. So the matrix we just looked at before, find out where you are through questionnaires, but also in-person events, workshops, and agree where you want to be in that first year. Upskill to influence. I talked about that already, giving people the skills to influence colleagues and other people. And then finally, like any other program, we've got to manage and monitor. So regularly check in on where you are, honestly, on that safety culture model. Don't look at it year 1 and then look at it at year 5. Look at it, every 6 months along that journey. Put in some indicators that tell you where you are and be honest about them. And if you're not where you want to be, there's a problem and go back and fix it. But it's about embedding each stage before you go on to the next. So that's the process that we talk about with members and other companies that we talk to. Now, the next part I want to talk about here is this bit, upskilling to influence. Really, really important, but often overlooked. So I'm going to touch on that in the next few slides here. So training to influence, it's easy to say, but seems to be quite difficult to do. If I just show you a couple of things here, I think you'll find them interesting. So we'd all probably agree that the NEBOSH diploma is really the gold standard in terms of health and safety competence. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're looking for a health and safety manager, you're probably thinking about, have they got the NEBOSH diploma? I mean, just look on the job board or anything like that for a senior health and safety person. I think still a little bit now, but certainly 5 years ago, have you got a NEBOSH diploma? If you haven't, not worth applying. Now, there have been other competitors that have come along in the time. NCRQ was another route to get to this goal. They're not around anymore. You've also got the NVQ route, which is a good and different sort of route here. But all of these things, whichever one we're talking about, 15 years ago, and I was delivering this course 15 years ago, so I know this from first hand. The syllabus, there's lots of things on the syllabus, but the 3 key areas that stick out are those 3. So law, risk, and then these technical skills around, knowing what a COSH assessment's all about, for example. So, for example, in terms of law, I don't know if many people on the call have done the NEBOSH diploma, perhaps, all fond memories, I'm sure. But if you look at the law, I mean, that's a whole week you spent really learning the law, and you did, and you had to know case law and case studies and so on. So that was really important. Risk, so you learn how to do a risk assessment, how to do noise assessments, those sorts of really technical issues around risk. And then technical, you went into lots and lots of detail about, how different chemicals affect your body and for example, the real technical detail. So that was what the NEBOSH diploma looks like, yes, 15 years ago, but probably about, 5-6 years ago as well. That was the picture. And not just the syllabus, but as I said, that stamp that you had, the NEBOSH diploma stamp, I've got that, I'm a good health and safety practitioner. So that was the picture. This is the picture now. It's changed. You'll notice that the content has changed and quite a few other things as well. So the NEBOSH diploma syllabus that was released in 2020, it's gone through changes before then, but 2020 I'll talk about here. There's a huge element of the syllabus that's about influencing behaviour. We're talking about psychology, we're talking about human factors, behavioural techniques. How do you bring people along that journey with you? And if the gold standard qualification in our business is talking about influencing behaviour, I think that shows you how important it is. We know that it's in ISO 45001, but it's also in this qualification. So it's got a huge part on influencing behaviour. It's got a huge part on professional skills. What I mean by that, putting reports together, influencing senior management in terms of cost-benefit analysis, those sort of business skills that you might imagine. So yes, we want to be a health and safety practitioner and we want this technical knowledge, but this course now talks about these things, and these are transferable skills, of course. The other thing with the up-to-date 2020 syllabus of the diploma, is the way that it's examined. It previously used to be three-hour exams. Literally where, you went into a classroom or an exam hall and you did an exam. And it isn't like that anymore, because that doesn't always find the right sort of people. So they've changed the assessment method. So the assessment method now is you have to practically demonstrate your skills. You might have to write a report or carry out an assessment. So it's a completely different qualification than it was before. The other thing I want to mention here is that as well as this qualification changing and being much more around influencing, it's also supported with the new IOSH competency framework. So in order to get to a certain level on the IOSH competency framework, you have to have done the NEBOSH diploma. And again, I think you see it all around, but also we talk to employers. What employers are looking for now is not someone that's got the stamp that they've done the NEBOSH diploma. It's someone that's a graduate member of IOSH or maybe even a chartered member. And if you're not familiar with that route, in order to be a graduate member of IOSH, you need to have the NEBOSH diploma. That gets you immediate entry into that status of membership. If you want to progress to the chartered member status, then you have to prove that you do the job. You have to go through a process of initial professional development and prove actually that you can do these things. And not surprisingly, one of those things is influencing senior management. So I would suggest that for employers that having a certain level of IOSH membership is far more valuable than the stamp of the certificate or the diploma in this case. You've already got the diploma, but then you've got these professional skills on top of it. So that's the bit that's what's changed. So I talked about earlier how important influencing is. This shows us how that's worked its way into the various qualifications that are there. Now, it hasn't just happened for safety professionals. It's also happened at different levels. So if you're not familiar with this title here, Leading Safely, so that is IOSH's, again, gold standard course for senior executives. That's who it's meant for, but companies use it for all sorts of different levels. And the clue is in the title. It talks about leading safely. And again, I've delivered that course personally for many years. It used to be called something else, and it used to focus on the law. So you're sitting with a number of executive directors, senior management team, talking about the law, Health and Safety at Work Act, etc. And while that might be interesting, and it is important to them because it affects them directly, we don't want people to do health and safety just because of the law. So leading safely now talks about different things. So if you talk about drivers, why am I interested in health and safety? It does talk about the law, of course, because people are interested in that, but it also talks about corporate social responsibility. It talks about sustainability, not from an environmental point of view alone, but from I actually really want to look after my people point of view. So lots of drivers, much more on the moral side, and this might be familiar with something I said earlier, much more on the moral side than on the legal and the financial side. So it's driving the senior management team from the right direction. Then, like any good system, it tells them what the problem is, but it gives them the skills. So it talks about leadership. So if you can imagine the situation here, we're talking to senior leadership teams in organisations and teaching them about leadership from a health and safety point of view. So that's quite often a very interesting conversation. But it asks questions like, think of some good leaders that you've come across in your career, and what do they do that you don't, or do you think you're a good leader? So it really focuses on that leadership element, which we've talked about is important. Once they understand how important that is, the course then gives them these influencing skills, how to influence behaviour. It's not about just telling people off because they haven't done the right thing. It's about influencing them, making them do the safe thing because they want to keep themselves and their colleagues safe, not because they don't want to get told off. So that's what these sort of good programmes that are around focus on. And even the next level of, again, managing safely, which you'll have heard of, it does talk about the law, of course, but it talks more about moral drivers. Do you want to see someone that you are responsible for getting hurt? Again, once you understand that, it talks about how you influence their behaviours. If we just think about it, if you think about your company, how many managers, supervisors, team leaders do you think really have these skills that they need to influence behaviour? And depending what the answer to that is, that's the sort of thing that these programmes can deliver. And of course, it does also have the technical skills. We want people at that level to be able to do risk assessment and accident investigation, so we can move along the cultural journey, and it isn't just down to the health and safety manager to do it. So those are how some of the other sort of gold standard qualifications that are out there have moved along with this need to be influencing and know what you're doing in that area. And to bring you right up to date, just finally, IOSH have now released this course called Managing Sustainably, which doesn't talk about the law at all. And that's probably all I need to tell you. It's very much like managing safely. It doesn't touch on the law at all. It focuses on the moral side, why we should care about colleagues and what are the skills that we've got to put it into place. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do here to make this journey along the cultural, roadmap, if you like, is to keep people safe, including ourselves, because it's the right thing to do, not because it's the law. So that's where we're trying to get to. And if we can get to that mindset, then the rest of the journey sort of is self-fulfilling. So I've talked enough about what I think and what our members think about safety culture. I'd like to introduce now a colleague of mine, Dan Shipway, to talk through a case study. Just before I do that, you'll see on the screen here there's a hyperlink. There are a couple of documents that you can download. One is about the course that I just mentioned, Managing Sustainability. There's also another one that talks about the case study that Dan's going to talk you through now. So thank you. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. The case study that I'd like to take you through this morning involves an organisation in the food and drink sector, Roberts Bakery. So just a bit of background first. Roberts Bakery are a family-owned business based in the Northwest. They've been around for over 130 years, mainly known for bread, crumpets and other delicious items that are sold in over 2,000 stores throughout the UK. So as they're a family business, they value things like integrity, respect, and the differences that each person within their workplace can bring. And there's actually over 800 employees that work for that business. But one area of concern for them, though, was health and safety. They wanted to demonstrate their commitment to these values by committing to keep employees safe. But at the same time, they recognised that A, they needed to improve the number of safety incidents in the workplace, and B, they felt that there were questions over the level of engagement of staff in this particular area. And this could be seen in the sort of usual ways that I'm sure most people on the session this morning will see. Things like the quality of risk assessments weren't where they needed to be. How accidents were investigated weren't quite up to the standards that were needed. And also, it had been some time since they'd invested in health and safety training, and any safety training had been delivered. So the senior leadership team at Roberts Bakery took the decision to invest in the health and safety of its employees and asked Make UK to help. They had a few objectives. One, they wanted to build on their existing knowledge of the moral, legal and financial reasons for managing health and safety. They wanted also to start with the senior leadership team and the board, and they wanted to partner with a training provider that could bring a bit of life to the subject. So Make UK put together a training program. It was based around providing their managers and supervisors with the knowledge and the tools to manage health, safety and environmental risks in the workplace. But based broadly on their existing policies, their risk assessments, their current accident investigation processes, but with real life examples that would help bring the subject and the course to life. So IOSH Managing Safely fitted perfectly at the sort of manager and supervisor level. And there were about 30 staff members that went through the training at their site. Now, what they saw was really, really encouraging engagement levels in the course. There were high marks all round in terms of the end of course assessment. There was great feedback, and particularly around the fact that it involved real life scenarios and situations that they could all relate to. They didn't forget about the senior leadership team. The course there, the IOSH Safety for Senior Executives and Directors, probably a course that most of you are familiar with. This course is designed for senior leaders so that they're fully aware of their responsibilities. The organisation themselves said commitment to health and safety starts at the top of the organisation. And I'm sure that's a refreshing thing for everybody on the session to hear. They also went on to say that the well-being of their colleagues was actually their top priority, and described attending the course as a very positive experience. But what were the results? Roberts Bakery quickly started to see an impact of the training. One, a reduction in lost time incidents, which inevitably means greater productivity. And that greater productivity pays for the actual training itself relatively quickly. There was an increase within the business for praising people for doing the right things, but also challenging behaviours in the right way when things weren't quite right. It also helped improve relationships between the senior leadership team and managers working on the shop floor, because they were working together on a common cause, the safety of their workers. Risk assessments were an initial focus, and people within the business felt empowered to manage risk within their areas, a lot more than they did previously. So the head of health, safety and environment commented that this wouldn't have happened without the increased knowledge that came about because of the training. it's a great example, and you can read the full case study on the Make UK website. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Dan. Brilliant, very good. Mark, shall I hand back to you? I think we've got a Q&A session now at the end.
Sure, yeah, thanks very much, Chris, and a really interesting presentation. Thank you, Chris, and thanks, Dan, as well, for that bit at the end for the case study. I think it's really important to get a real life example of something being implemented, and your example there, Dan, I think really put it in a positive way. Some of the stuff that you pulled out, the buy-in at the top is really, is really good to hear. So it was a really good way to end the presentation, I think. We've got 20 minutes or so, guys, just to go through some questions, if that's okay. I just thought I'd just make a point. It's quite interesting, Chris, when you were that sort of chart of where people are on their journey, and someone put in the chat box that actually it's a mixture of many, and but mainly interactive, which I found interesting. That's possible, is it, to sort of pick little bits and then make your own sort of cake from it, and if you're taking from various different theories?
Yeah, 100%, Mark. Yeah, and in fact, I'd go further than that, because I'd say, look, you've got this basic, culture model, and you can Google it and get one version. You can get another version. You can get the IOSH version that's a bit more structured, but none of them mean anything unless they mean something to your company. So in companies where we've had the most success, we've taken, if you like, the basic 4 headings, and then we've tailored the questions to them. So it's got to be, don't take something off the shelf, other than those 4 stages. Tailor the questions, tailor the points to, something that suits your company, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I found it interesting. You said during your presentation about, you're saying a lot that this is not a tick box. Safety culture is not a tick box exercise, and if you are finding yourself ticking boxes, then you're not doing it right. And I think you correct. I think it's very important to keep saying that it's not, because it goes against the idea of what the safety culture is. And interesting as well about the affiliation with the standard, because that is tricky, isn't it? Because that is such a huge part, an important part of health and safety, and you have to adhere to it and stuff. But it's a difficult mindset to get out of, though, isn't it? And you guys obviously lobbied to get the safety culture. Was that a challenging sort of time to get that in?
100%. I mean, if we don't want to bore everyone to death with the history, but if you think about 45,001, it was released in 2018. We started work on it with many other organisations, including HSE, for example. With the International Standards Organisation, we started work with them, I would say, probably in about 2014. So, it took a long time. I mean, there were lots of different things in there, but it took a long time to get that in. And the reason for that is that if you think about a true international standard, I wasn't in those meetings, a colleague of mine was, but they're sitting around a table with representatives from all around the world.
International,
right. Yeah. And in those days, by the way, it would have all been round a table, not via Teams.
Back in the olden days.
And the problem there is that the issue there is you've got, when you start talking about culture, and then you introduce international, there are many different national cultures. Clearly, we know this around the world. So it's very difficult to get that cultural element into the standard. But, we got, there wasn't just us campaigning, others as well. But I think it's the right thing to do, clearly. But just one other point. I think to take, something you mentioned there, it's the right thing to put it into the standard, glad it is, etc. Because everyone's talking about it. That's a positive. But one of the risks with it is when you put something in a standard, it then falls into the, okay, it's in the standard, it's clearly described what I've got to do. The auditor's coming in next week, I've got to demonstrate to them that I do this. And there's therefore a huge risk that it does become a tick box exercise. You're right, I did say that a few times, but yeah, for a reason. Right.
Yeah.
So there is a huge risk that because it's in the standard, it's now a box that I've got to tick. But if you look at the details of clause 5, the ISO know that, and that's why they haven't said have a great safety culture. They've said you need to do certain things. And I just pick one example. It says that senior management, and it means, it's defined, it says the most senior manager in your organisation needs to positively demonstrate how they are involved in the safety culture. So in the old days, and I'm only thinking about, prior to 2018, I don't know if people agree with me here, but the auditor comes in and they speak to the health and safety manager for most of the time, and maybe some other people. Now, if they're doing it properly, they want to see the most senior person there because they've got to embody the safety culture. That's what the standard says. And, people shouldn't be getting passed off if that isn't the case. So, that's my view on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. We've got another question here, probably a bit more technical, actually. Someone has said, where you have it's about audits, where you have a policy that you audit against, how do you audit or review your policy to ensure that it remains fit for use? And I think what she's saying here is, would it be better if the policy author, if it is the policy author, or should it be someone different to the policy author? This is interesting, to ensure impartiality. And you go different. What do you think?
Yeah, so I've got a straightforward answer, and it's not straightforward to implement, just to be clear. But to me, it must be someone impartial. It must be, because, like we talked about perception in the presentation earlier, the person that wrote the policy has got some unconscious bias already. They know what they were thinking when they wrote it, so they'll have a different standpoint. So I think you've got to do two things. I think you've got to get someone that's impartial. And let me be clear about what I mean there. I don't mean necessarily someone external. I just mean someone that didn't write the policy or someone from another department. So it's someone that is impartial. However, the other element is they need to be trained in what they're looking for and what the policy is about. So again, where we've worked with members and we've had success is to take the policy and then produce a simple one-page, if possible, set of questions to test the policy. Don't just turn up with the policy in your hand and say, can you demonstrate how you do this? You need set questions that are there. But I think, as the person that asked the question said, I think, being impartial is critical, because it's not about just passing it. It's about identifying weaknesses and getting better.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point she makes, actually, just to be more open-minded, aren't you? Naturally, you're going to be a bit more questioning, I guess, around that. Yeah. Really interesting questions just come in, Chris, that I'd like to throw at you, if you don't mind. Someone asks, it's interesting, is there anything like a plateau in the implementation of a safety culture in the organisation? You can get there.
Yeah, 100%.
What does it look like?
Yeah. So, okay, what it looks like is one of the, and possibly the person that asked the question has heard of this already, or many people have. If you go back, you talk about safety culture, you go right back to the beginning, or certainly near the beginning, you've got something called the Bradley curve, which maybe we're familiar with. And that talks about a plateau. So what it says is, you do the basics, you bring in management systems, procedures, forms, systems, etc. Right? You've got a form that you can report accidents on. That's fantastic. So you definitely you should get a reduction in accidents. So you see that curve of accidents coming down as your safety management system matures. And if we talk about 45001, as you put in all the other bits, like having a management system, tracking accidents, etc., it brings it down. But once you've got all those things in place, you run straight up against a plateau. So you'll get to having who knows how many people you employ, but you'll get to a level of accidents where you're having them. and you'll say things like, well, was it an accident really? You know, someone tripped over or they cut their finger, and was it, you know, yes, that's an accident. Yeah, someone's been hurt. You know, it's not about severity, it's an accident. So if you really want to get down to zero, what you've then got to do is do what we've been talking about today, which is to understand the behavioural elements of people. You know, it's not just about following rules. It is about that last area, you know, interdependent, rely on each other to keep each other safe. And I'll be honest with you, you know, in all of the companies that we have anything to do with, and all the companies I know of that I've dealt with around the world, there aren't many that can genuinely demonstrate they're at that interdependent level. You know, the poll we did earlier is a good indication of reality.
Yeah.
You know, and if we really want to get that, it's hard. And you might be at that plateau for a couple of years, actually, and it's quite demoralising. But to break through that and get down to zero, that's where we need to really look at the behaviour of people and trying to influence it. And sorry, I'm rambling on a little bit.
No, please go for it. No, you're fine. You're fine.
Where that really shows itself, actually, is where they take that safety culture that they've got home with them. Because, you know, it's not a work thing or a home thing. It's a I want to keep everyone safe thing.
Yep.
It is what it is. You know, and I'm not saying, you know, we become health and safety crazy and we stop our, you know, sons and daughters climbing up trees, etc. But, you know, we take some of that looking after each other home, you know, and possibly we do it at home, and actually it's bringing it from home into work. So it's all about, it sounds a bit cliche, but, you know, having that sort of view of family, actually, you know, that's, you know, we should have a similar view for colleagues at work. We should want to look after them.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Chris, I think you touched on it as well in the presentation, that it's doing it for the right reasons almost, isn't it? That goes beyond the tick box and the implement. You're doing it because if you just strip it all back, you want to help people. We talked about this a bit offline briefly, didn't we? You want to help people. You want to look out for people and you care. And there's, you know, again, I'm conscious of being a bit philosophical here, but ultimately that's what it comes down to, really.
Yeah, agreed. And, you know, if you ask a lot of people why they want to implement 45001 or any health and safety management system, honestly, at a certain level anyway, they'll say, well, you know, we need 45001 in order to get into the supply chain of this tier one company, or we can't tender for this if we haven't got it, etc., etc. So that's why we want to get 45001. But, you know, you cannot get 45001 unless you have a good safety culture, or you're on your way to it, let's say. And so my point is, if we can change to everyone looking after each other because they want to and they know it's the right thing to do, the rest of 45,001's really easy. You know, it's actually just complying with the law. So if you get the safety culture bit first, just get that sorted and have a plan in place over this 3-5 year, you know, phasing. The rest of it's easy. You probably do the rest of it already, actually. Yeah,
sure. One of the things that I found interesting from the white paper that we put together, and you touched on it again, was people were pretty candid, weren't they, in their approach on the maturity scale where they were, which was nice, which was pleasantly surprising, wasn't it? And it was good to see. But we talked about it before. You need to be very honest, don't you, of where you are, and the danger is, the people up the hierarchy might be, we're great, we're doing this perfectly, but they're not really. They're not really, and they're just in. But it's difficult, isn't it, though, Chris? But it was good, refreshing to see here that people were being honest. But it's almost like you have to be, don't you, to go on, to be able to move on, because otherwise you're skewed, and you're not going. You're skewed. You don't know where you are in your system.
Yeah, but it's, to me, everyone knows it's human nature, isn't it? You know, it's like it's like admitting that something's wrong or admitting you're ill or something. You know, a lot of people don't want to do that. You know, because for lots of different reasons. We can't make improvements until we admit that there is a problem, you know, and until you make improvements, as I just said, you can't really genuinely achieve 45,001. So, yes, you know, I think that's really impressive how people have answered the question at the beginning. I think that does indicate where certainly the UK is. And that shows us that actually there's a long way to go. And I think we all know that. But unless we're honest, you know, we're not going to get there.
Yeah, quite absolutely. Coming to the end shortly. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'll probably squeeze a couple more questions in, I think, and we'll start with quite a big one. Chris, if you don't mind. A guy called Tony has said, on the topic of horizon scanning, what do we consider to be the next step change for safety culture? He says it's interesting that it has taken a considerable amount of time to get a sort of mindset change. But what do you think is the next step? It's quite a big question. Is it perhaps part of it is that honesty? Perhaps that's a bit of a step change. But what do you foresee?
Well, and I say before I answer this is just an opinion. It's not based on any facts.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Other than seeing what happens in the industry, if you like. But I think that auditing bodies, creditable auditing bodies anyway, are going to get a lot stricter around particularly clause 5. You know, they are the tool is there, the measure is there for them to use. Have you met all the things that are in clause 5? And they're hard, you know, they're hard to do. They're about safety culture. And, you know, anyone that's been through an ISO audit or any sort of audit by an external body will know that they actually look in detail at these questions. So, you know, you will have to demonstrate, I'll use a different example to did last time, you know, how senior, not safety people, senior directors of companies present safety performance and safety culture performance to the rest of the organisation. If you want to pass, if you want to get to the right level in 45001, at some point in the coming years, you will have to prove that, demonstrate it, you know, how audits work. So that is a step change I can see happening. I think the other thing is that in terms of supporting that, and we see it with IOSH already, I mean, IOSH are the membership, really, the membership organisation for health and safety. And they are correctly pushing the agenda of sustainability. You know, for many, many years, sustainability has been interchangeable with the word environment, you know, and it's the same thing. Well, it isn't the same thing. Well, you know, you could argue it is, but it's the wider environment, right? It's not just the air, land and water. It's people and places and the society around us. You know, it's how we impact that. And to a lot of people, that probably sounds a little bit, you know, highfalutin and, you know, not reality. But that is where we're going. And rightly so. You know, we're thinking about how our workplaces impact on not just our employees, but everyone else. You see it already, to go back to 45001 again. They used to talk about employees. That used to be the word. And all they did was change the word from employees to workers. And what they've done by doing that is they've changed it so that actually in the standard, you are responsible for not just your employees, but contractors and anyone that works with you. That's why the word is workers. Yeah. So to summarise, I think the step change is that it's going to become companies' responsibilities, not legally, but standard-wise, are going to become wider. And that examination of your safety culture in order to pass the 45001 audit is going to become tougher.
Fab, brilliant. We better wind this up now, but thank you so much and for your presentation. Thanks for responding to the Q&A as well. Dan, thank you so much for jumping on board with the case study as well. Thanks, guys. We really appreciate you coming on. I've seen we've got quite a few questions here. So what I'm suggesting is perhaps we pick up those questions offline and then we can answer them later on, perhaps in an article, because it's certainly raised a lot of debate, which is really good. But thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Right. So thanks, Chris. Thanks. Right. So that's the end of the webinar. Thank you, everyone, for attending. As I said before, we have, if you want to download your CPD certificate, you can do that now. And if you want to listen back, as I mentioned at the start, the link to this webinar will be emailed out, hopefully in the next couple of days or so. Download the white paper as well that we put together, because there's a lot more information there, some really nice quotes, and Chris has done a really good foreword for it. So do have a look at that and see and have a read. Finally, we've got a webinar next Wednesday as well, again with a firm called Safety Culture, and they've done a bit of survey of the thoughts of the people who are on the front line. So that'll be another. It's with Tiffany Argent and Sue Parker-Tantish, who have just been voted onto the ARSH Council. So that'll be a good one. Register for that. And mostly, yes, thanks again for attending, and have a good weekend. Take care.